We thought this was a big part of Dickinson history.
It's the stories it holds, the past. I think the architecture is fantastic.
Historic buildings give people in communities a sense of the way life has been lived in that community over time.
The Galveston, Houston, and Henderson Railroad is one of the oldest rail lines in Texas. It was known as the Old Reliable Short Line. Galveston and Houston were the two most important urban centers of the Texas Gulf Coast in the 1850s when the railroads were first built in the state. In 1902, the railroad built a modern for its time passenger depot in the farming community of Dickinson, midway between the two cities. Since Galveston was the major port in Texas, this was a very heavily traveled rail line for passengers, but even more so for freight traffic.
These railroad stops became town sites, and because of the crucial economic importance of railroads, the depot, the passenger and freight station, was always a major small-town landmark.
Dickinson was settled shortly before the Civil War as a ranching and agricultural center.
This station was the life of Dickinson, business-wise and social-wise.
So it became a farming community and a ranching community for that reason. And of course they used the railroad.
Prominent Galveston architect George B. Stowe designed the station in the most popular architectural style of the era.
The Dickinson station exemplifies late 19th century American architecture, Victorian architecture.
The Dickinson Depot boasted the only cupola on the line. There were 2 waiting rooms, each with 2 sets of half-moon windows. The Dickinson Depot was constructed in a time of racial segregation across the South. The building was designed to have a white waiting room and a colored waiting room. During this time, Texas law required schools, theaters, restaurants, and hotels to be segregated. This law also included train stations.
Other types of public buildings, such as train stations, accommodated black passengers by providing separate spaces for the different races.
These practices were not eliminated in Texas until the late 1960s. Railroads were a miracle of modern technology in the 19th century, and over the years the depot became vitally important to the economic success of Dickinson.
At the time when this was built and finished in 1902, it was the most elaborate railroad station on the G.H&H line. They had this large park for horse racing, for picnics. They even had a county fair on the grounds, and people came by the railroad.
By 1960, with new superhighways and airports springing up, railroad passenger service was abandoned. The beautiful Dickinson Depot was now used solely for freight. Sadly, the building, which was once a busy hub for travelers, deteriorated rapidly. In 1967, the railroad announced plans to demolish the badly neglected Dickinson Depot.
It looked pretty bad. The 1943 storm had destroyed the cupola. It wasn't up there. These 2 doors that you see here were not here.
The Weed and Wish Garden Club in Dickinson heard about the plans to demolish the station. Club leaders met with railroad officials to see if they would donate the building to the garden club.
Well, the vision was to have a garden center out of the building. But once we acquired it, we realized it was too small for our garden club use. So we said, well, let's make a railroad center and museum.
The railroad agreed to give the depot to the garden club, but it would have to be moved off railroad right-of-way.
A lot of people thought, well, how are you going to move it?
Moving day was a big event for the people in Dickinson.
The whole town came out. It was such an exciting experience to move that building and go across Dickinson Bayou. I was smiling and clapping my hands as I came down the road.
Through the years, garden club members and volunteers worked hard to restore and maintain the building. It would take 40 years to find the money for the restoration. Eventually, it became a project of the Dickinson Historical Society.
We went to every organization we could and gave talks about what we were trying to do and to raise money, and we got a lot of publicity.
To get these windows put back in, it took about a year.
We tried very, very hard to make it exactly like it was.
The Dickinson Historical Society learned about possible funds from the Texas Department of Transportation.
The railroad being a form of transportation, I think they became interested in what we were trying to do. And we applied and were happy to get the funds.
Not long after moving the Dickinson Depot, the railroad offered the Weed and Wish Garden Club the 100-year-old League City Railroad station.
The G.H&H called us after we had acquired this station, the Dickinson station. Said, we're going to tear down the League City station. Would you like to have it?
The Garden Club wanted the building, but it was too large to be moved down the busy streets and highways. So the League City station had to be cut into two sections for the move.
The League City Depot has architectural ornamentation characteristic of the 1870s and 80s.
Today, both historic depots are beautifully restored and officially known as the Historic Railroad Center. They are serving the residents of Dickinson as a combined museum and community center. The buildings seem to glow with the attention and refurbishment they have received.
The depot is a kind of wonderful space to inhabit. It's light and airy, it has high ceilings, and the building, even though it's small, feels expansive. The architectural finishes of the building are very plain, very economical, very dignified.
The arched doors, the bay window and ticket office, all have been carefully restored. The handsome brick fireplace is in prime condition, and the building's focal piece, the majestic cupola, has been replaced.
It would be probably a pile of sawdust, because they were going to tear it down and just do away with it, because they didn't need it anymore.
Let me welcome everybody to the grand opening of the Historic Railroad Center.
In April of 2007, Dickinson residents gathered for the grand opening of the Historic Railroad Center. The people of Dickinson feel a great sense of pride in their restored railroad stations that remind visitors of a bygone era. The historic 1902 Galveston, Houston, and Henderson Railroad Depot serves as a tribute to Dickinson's past and to the vision and determination of a community that never gave up hope that they could save this important part of the city's heritage. The spirit of the old reliable short line will live on in the hearts of the people of Dickinson.